Prime Field.
A 54-point rout, a 32-point road victory, a neutral site win over a ranked opponent. Those three results form more than an opening tableau. They are a diagnostic. This documentary examines one question. Do the first three games of UConn's 2025 and 26 season reveal the structural foundations necessary for a championship run? The preseason number 1 Huskies opened with a 13-point win over number 20 Louisville, a 99-67 victory at Florida State, and a 54-point defeat of Loyola Chicago. Taken together, those margins, plus 13, plus 32, plus 54, provide measurable evidence. They speak to defense, depth, and offensive continuity after significant roster turnover. The next chapters trace the tests and the answers embedded in those performances, and how those answers shape national perception and tournament projection. The first test was deliberate. UConn faced number 20 Louisville on neutral ground at the Armed Forces Classic in Annapolis. It was the first women's basketball game staged at that military venue. Louisville arrived as a tournament-qualified opponent. That context matters. Neutral court wins against tournament-caliber teams carry a net and resume weight. Defensively, UConn controlled the game. Louisville shot 22 of 64 from the field, 34.4%, and 8 of 24 from three-point range, 33.3%. The Cardinals narrowed a 25-9 first-quarter gap to within 10 late in the fourth, but the Huskies maintained control. Sarah Strong posted 21 points on the 9 of 17 shooting and grabbed 9 rebounds. Azzi Fudd added 20 points in 38 minutes. Those performances suggested both perimeter scoring and interior presence could coexist. A neutral site victory over a ranked opponent provided an early resume-building win and set the stage for the road test that followed. Preseason standing is conditional. UConn entered the year as the consensus number 1. That status creates expectations and scrutiny. Historically, prior UConn preseason numbers 1 have often translated ranking into championships, but failures previously correlated with injuries or depth shortfalls. 9 days after Louisville, UConn traveled to Tallahassee. The Huskies posted a 99-67 win over Florida State. The Seminoles entered with a strong net profile and ACC pedigree. The margin, plus 32, mattered for selection metrics that value blowouts against quality opponents on the road. This margin did not simply pad a stat line. It signaled to committees, pollsters, and opponents that the preseason evaluations still fit on-court performance. In short order, the narrative shifted away from can they and toward do they sustain it? That question transitions to the on-court mechanics that produce those margins, offense and defense. The season's offensive calculus hinged on replacements for departed playmakers. Paige Beckers, Caitlin Chen, and Aubrey Griffin were no longer on the roster. Evidence was required that remaining stars could sustain scoring and that newcomers could contribute. Across the 3 games, Azzi Fudd averaged 17.3 points on 48.1% shooting. She produced a 20-point half early at Florida State. Her 3-point conversion across those outings was low, 4 of 26, 15.4%, but her mid-range and interior scoring remained efficient. Sarah Strong averaged 17.7 points, 9.3 rebounds, and 3.0 steals per game. Auriemma preserved her minutes in lopsided contests, exposing strategic load management even as Strong's statistical impact remained substantial. As a freshman, Strong finished last season with nationally leading efficiency metrics referenced by coaching staff. Her two-way profile anchored offensive continuity and defensive initiation. Kayleigh Heckel emerged as an immediate contributor. The USC transfer produced 14 points across Louisville and Florida State and generated multiple high-steal performances, including 6 steals in the first half at FSU. Her offense, 12 points on 6 of 12 shooting at FSU, showed she could score without relying on the three-point shot. These performances indicated the offensive burden would not rest on a single player. Instead, Fudd and Strong functioned as primary engines, while transfers and role players supplied timely scoring. Defense framed the season-opening narrative. Questions about institutional defensive intelligence followed the roster turnover. The answer arrived in system execution rather than isolated heroics. Against Loyola Chicago, UConn recorded 25 steals and held the Ramblers to 9 of 36 shooting in the first half, 25%, while preventing points for the final 9 over 46 of the third quarter. Loyola committed 36 turnovers. Against Florida State, the Huskies forced 23 turnovers and recorded 15 steals. The Seminoles' offensive rating fell well below their season norms. Florida State shot 38.1% from the field and 38.7% from 3. Those numbers translated into a 32-point loss. Kayleigh Heckel's role on defense was explicit. Her 6 first-half steals at FSU reflected a tactical assignment within the press. That assignment allowed defensive load balancing, rotating Fudd, Strong, and Arnold without compromising coverage. The press and recover architecture functioned with multiple players executing pressure simultaneously. The result, a defensive structure that did not require an alpha defender to carry the unit. The system produced turnovers, transition points, and defensive stability. Depth was a strategic variable. The coaching staff committed to rotation choices from day one. That commitment resolved an early season question. Would UConn play a short rotation to preserve stars or employ broad minutes to build durability? 11 players logged minutes against Loyola. Bench contributors supplied 36 points in Tallahassee, including 12 from Heckel and 10 from Sarah Williams. Against Louisville, bench scoring totaled 16. Ice Brady, Ashlyn Shade, and Ali Zabel logged meaningful minutes without dominating box scores. The approach served two functions. First, it preserved primary contributors. Second, it exposed role players to competitive minutes that matter in tournament contexts. Championship runs often hinge on the ability to rest starters across a long season. UConn's rotation choices indicated readiness to use depth as a resource rather than a contingency. Leadership is measurable in high-leverage moments. Louisville, the closest game, offered the clearest test. KK Arnold scored 13 points with 7 rebounds and 2 steals in 29 minutes. Her aggressive play altered late A-game dynamics when Louisville narrowed the gap. Against Florida State, Arnold produced 11 points on 5 of 10 shooting. Those were not isolated flashes. They constituted repeatable secondary scoring reliability. Sarah Strong's 14 steals across 3 games, averaging 4.7 per game, served as a defensive pressure valve. Her ability to create turnovers converted defense to offense. Azzi Fudd's first half output at Florida State illustrated how primary leaders set tempo early rather than coasting in lopsided affairs. Collectively, these actions answered whether secondary leaders existed beyond the headline names. The evidence showed multiple players capable of executing in pressure moments. UConn's program history provides comparative benchmarks. The 2024-25 national champion began 3-0 before conference play and finished 37-3 en route to a title. That team's early wins included a November victory over number 14 North Carolina by 11 points. The 2025-26 opening sequence, by comparison, displayed more dominant margins. The combination of a neutral site ranked win, a substantial road blowout against an ACC program, and a rout of a mid-major non-conference opponent produces a non-conference resume spanning Quadrant 1 and Quadrant 2 metrics. Historically, UConn teams presenting similar early margins have rarely faltered deep into the season. That precedent is instructive, though not prescriptive. The selection committee's primary evaluation tool is the net. Neutral site wins and road blowouts influence seeding calculus. The Louisville result functions as a neutral site credential. The Florida State margin functions as a road quality signal. The aggregate profile creates a narrative consistent with a number 1 seed projection, assuming sustainable form over the regular season. Conversely, an early loss or narrower escape would have shifted polling and seeding narratives toward competitors. Early dominant wins reduce openings for challengers and ranking and seeding conversations. In practical terms, the first 3 games reduced ambiguity around UConn's resume. Non-conference play served as a microcosm of championship infrastructure. The 3-game sample validated core components: offensive engines through Azzi Fudd and Sarah Strong, immediate impact from Kayleigh Heckel and role contributors, defensive depth capable of press-driven turnover generation, and a rotation philosophy that leverages depth. The full season remains unwritten, but the early evidence addresses the critical preseason questions. Can this roster defend without prior institutional continuity? Can it score in Beckers' absence? Can it manage minutes across a deep rotation? The 3-game case studies answered each of those questions in the affirmative, based on on-court performance and measurable margins. These conclusions lead to a final consideration: legacy. Early season margins do not guarantee championships. They do, however, construct a foundation of evidence. If UConn maintains dominant wins, efficient execution, and balanced depth, then the preseason number 1 designation will be grounded in performance rather than in an expectation. This opening sequence aligns with historical precedent and supplies concrete resume credentials for seeding. It also demonstrates a systemic resilience: defense executed by multiple players, offense shared among primary and secondary scorers, and rotation choices that protect stars while building bench competence. In that sense, the 2025 and 26 non-conference crucible is diagnostic. It has already defined key elements of a championship blueprint. Whether this evidence culminates in a Final Four and a national title will depend on sustained execution, health, and adaptation across the season. For now, the record is clear. The Huskies answered the opening tests. The structure is visible. The foundation is measurable. The next chapters of the season will determine whether those early answers translate into legacy.
Prime Field!